Howdy, Image Bears. Welcome back to Christian Craft, where we talk about God, the Bible, and everything else while playing Minecraft. We have a house, an incomplete house, but we're making progress on it. I quite like the direction it's going, you know. There's a lot that needs work, but I want to take a bit of a break from the house. And I say that, and I'm probably going to end up working on the house this episode anyways. Working on the house is a nice task because it's easy for me to stay focused on what I'm talking about. I think, honestly, I'm going to work on the interior and make a basement. That's what I'll do this video because I don't like this here, this stuff. Basement episode. But besides the point, we have some things we need to do. We need to go plant some seeds. Plant some seeds. I, once again, don't remember how many subscribers we left off on last episode. I think it was 485 last episode. I don't honestly remember. So let's just, if we get it wrong, we can change it back next time. But today, I believe we're at 415 subscribers. I'm going to check real quick. I have never once recorded, pulled up beforehand how many subscribers I have. I always forget to do it. So let's do it. 413. I was pretty close. So, was that 28 subscribers? We've gained 28 subscribers. Welcome. Thank you for subscribing. Now you are a member of this excellent wheat field. Ooh, that's incorrect. So, I think, I said no. I said, we're not making house progress today, and I'm going to make house progress anyways, because I changed my mind, because I kind of want to keep working on it. The other task that I'm divided with is this over here. It is, this is our villager breeder. That's our iron farm. Here's the problem, folks. The iron farm, I have to do almost completely off camera. Maybe I live stream it, Maybe I live stream it, because it's going to be so boring. I need to get 24 villagers into that, and then 4 zombies into that, and then I need to make sure it all runs properly. That's boring. So I'd rather say, hey guys, here's the iron farm. Look, you see it. I started it. And then in the next episode, I'm like, okay guys, let's see how well this iron farm works. Whoa, look, it's a cool iron farm. Yeah. In my mind, that's how it's going to work. But maybe I'll live stream it. Let me know in the comments how you want me to handle that, because we're pretty limited, guys. We need more. We need to be wealthier, and we need emeralds for that. And iron farm's the best way to get emeralds. We've got enough. Like, we have the right books. But we don't have enough diamond tools and diamond armor and emeralds to max out all of the enchantments. So as far as progress goes, like Minecraft game progression, we need that iron farm up and running. This week, that will happen. It will happen this week. I just took my last final exam at Texas A&M today. Whoop. Giga Maggies. Smash like if you're an Aggie. Smash like if you're not. Drop the comments. But yeah, so this week, probably have a lot more free time. I can get that iron farm up and running. But outside of that, this video. What is this video about? Because you did click on this video. You didn't click on that other video. You clicked on this one. So what are we talking about today? What are you talking about? Who are you talking to? Oh my gosh, I love that movie. Truman Show? Banger movie. Today we're going to talk about biology. We're going to talk about evolution. We're going to talk about the origin of life. We're going to talk about those things. And those things are unnecessarily controversial. And I don't know as to why. Well, I do know why. But it shouldn't be that way. I study biology at Texas A&M. It does not make me an expert. Even if I were an expert in biology, that doesn't mean you have to take my word for things. I'm a big proponent of common sense. I'm a big proponent of doing your own research. You don't have to just agree with scholarship. If there's reasons to disagree with scholarship, go ahead. I'm not speaking on behalf of scholarship here. I'm not speaking on behalf of Texas A&M. I'm not speaking on behalf of biologists. I'm speaking on behalf of myself and my own view. My own view, speaking on behalf of myself. This is what I think. And since I'm putting this out on the internet, I'm open to scrutiny. Please. If I say something false, if I misrepresent something, if I'm, just correct me if I'm wrong, please. Be my guest. Do it in an uplifting, kind way. If you're going to be a booty, if you're going to be prideful and arrogant and just like, you just believe in God, that's why you think this. If I can't if you're not possibly going to try to understand me, I'm still going to be loving to you. Sometimes I think the most loving thing is to say like, hey man, you're being a goober. I never want to be mean. I want to be nice in all that I do. And sometimes the most loving thing is to say, hey man, your argument, you're kind of being a goober. So with that being said, evolution. What are my views on evolution? What is evolution? What are my views on life? What is life? These are the questions. To me, as somebody who came to Texas A&M to study biology, those are the most interesting questions. They're the most fascinating questions to me. There is no question more fascinating to me than where did life come from and what is it? I love that. I love to study that. That's what biology is. Okay? Not an expert. I have a bachelor's degree in biomedical science from A&M. I would love to become an expert on this topic. I would love to go to further schooling, get a master's, get a PhD, do research on this stuff. I would love to do that. If that's what God has for me, I would love that. So, with that being said, what are my views then? First of all, let me express something to you. Evolution is a scientific buzzword. And what I mean by buzzword is it's said a lot, but oftentimes it's not really defined. And sometimes people refer to evolution to refer to an unguided random process of natural selection. But then other scientists would say, well, in what sense is it random if nature's selecting it? And then other scientists would say, well, in what way is it random if there is something being selected? Like, it's complicated. Let's start there. If you like simple definitions, you're not going to like this video. Because in the field of biology, we don't really have a universal definition of what life is. We have a common understanding of what life does, the characteristics and qualities of life, that if these qualities are fulfilled, we would consider that thing alive. And if those qualities are not fulfilled, we would say that is not alive. But then that is, that begs a question. What if there's something that's alive that does not fit within our current conventional definition of what is life? Yeah, that's what is the beauty of science. The beauty of science is we don't have all the answers, and we should investigate and explore through the scientific method. So this video is going to be a lot of complicated definitions. I'm going to try to make them simple. I'm going to try to speak in common sense. I'm going to try to avoid jargon. I'm gonna try my best. Do I have a Silk Touch axe? I feel like I should. What happened to my Silk Touch axe? Do I not have one? Can I break with a pickaxe and get these back? Yeah, I can. Cool. It's a little cringe, but it's less wasteful. This takes forever. So, if you are like, I like very simple definitions, I just want you to make the point in a YouTube short, maybe I'll make a YouTube short for this. But if you like getting into the nitty gritty, you like just listening to long yap sessions in the background, this video is for you. If you want me to get right to the point and explain in a very simple fact of the matter of fact way, this video is probably not for you. But let me try my best. Let me try my best to make a single, clear, concise point about my view, and then I will explain it. Okay? Ooh, that was interesting. This is my view of science, evolution, life, origin of life, etc. I understand the scientific method to be a methodology of deduction where you start from the logical assumption that this universe is consistent and rational and observable. So then we perform experiments. We start from a deduction, and then from that deduction, we apply it. That's what the scientific method is we conduct experiments, we conduct observations to gather the inference to the best explanation. And the inference to the best explanation is the one that in our uniform and repeated experience, we observe it to be true. In our uniform and repeated experience, we observe it to be true. Science is very broad in its definition because we can observe something to be true and then we gain new evidence and it changes what we know. That's the beauty of science. Science evolves. Science changes. Our understanding grows. Our understanding gains nuance as evidence is explored and observed, right? So I understand science. This is the definition of science I am offering. I think this is the historic definition of science. And if you're watching this video, you might not like this definition of science, and that's fine. We can do a whole video where we debate definitions. We could do a whole video where, whatever. You could join my Discord. We can yap about what science is. You feel free to disagree with me. But my point is, I hold that science is a methodology that assumes truth is knowable, so then we test what is around us and we gather evidence to explain the world around us. Some people have this circular definition of science, both theists and atheists. I'm not calling anyone out specifically. Some people in the modern secular world, where we have secular presuppositions, they presuppose that science is what is within the natural realm. Science is the natural realm. There is nothing beyond it. To infer or appeal to that is unscientific. If that's your worldview, that's fine. You can have that worldview. I'm not going to protest your right. The reason I don't hold that view of science is historically that's not where science is derived. Western science, that is. I am a Western guy. You know, I am a Western guy after all. I'm running around in circles because I'm trying to figure out where I want to put the basement. I feel like it makes the most sense to like put a staircase here. I don't really know. I kind of think maybe this corner, but then that would require me to move these chests. Let me run around in circles while I think about it. And remember how I said I'm going to give a clear, concise definition? It's impossible. Let me just accept that. Let me accept it's not that clear. It's not that clear. It's going to take some laboring. It's going to take some explaining. If you clicked a 2-hour-long Minecraft video, you're expecting it to be 2 hours long. Okay? So forgive me. Let me just admit it's hard for me to explain simply. Historically, science is a methodology based on there is this is just the Western. You can disagree with this. I'm just saying this is historically where the scientific method is derived. I'm not saying to do science you must believe in God. I'm not saying that. But also it is true that the Western scientific method, we were able to advance science and technology because of this assumption that there is a single unified rational mind behind the universe, behind everything in the universe that created the universe, and that same unified rational mind created our minds. So then within our minds, we are able to test the world around us and arrive at reasonable understandings of the world. That's where the Western scientific method came from. And if you're saying, well, there's also Arabic science, there's also other Eastern sciences. Yes. And they all presupposed a single unifying mind behind the universe. It's interesting because the cultures we observe that don't have a scientific method, they still have technology. Every culture has technology. Science is not merely technology. Science is actually like a logical system of deduction and induction. Something like ancient China, for example. Ancient China didn't have a view of a god, and they didn't have a view of science that we observe in the West and in the East, where there is an assumption of a unified mind behind the universe in such a way that we can rationally understand the universe. Guys, no matter how much I stare at this blank space, I have no idea where I want to put the basement. I'm thinking, despite how annoying it is, I think I want to move all of these chests because I think I want it to be this back wall. Right? Whatever. Here's what we're going to do. Instead of moving these here just to move them down here, we're just going to dig under it. And we're just going to mark out this basement area, and then we can move the chest. Is this music a little too loud? I fear it's too loud. Let's do 20 and bop that down to 5. There we go. I'm not saying you need to believe in God to do science. That's not my point. I'm not saying you need to believe in God to do moral things. That's not my point. Don't make conclusions I'm not making. I am just saying that the Western basis for math and logic and science was the Christian worldview. I mean, look at Isaac Newton. Look at Leibniz. Look at, for biology, look at Lamarck and Leeuwenhoek. I don't know how to say his name as somebody who does biology. No idea. There's so many. I like science. I'm bad at pronouncing things. If you watch these videos, I mispronounce things all the time. It's not my area of expertise. But biology, for that matter, is not my area of expertise. It's an area of interest where I would like to become an expert. So, besides the point, I don't need to give a history lesson. You clicked on this video not for a history lesson. You clicked on this video because you want to hear my views on evolution and life and whatever. So why does what science is matter? Because if you understand science to be only what exists within the natural observable realm, then you and I can't possibly come to an agreement. And that's fine. I still want to love and respect people where I can't possibly come to an agreement with them. But if somebody defines science is only what is observable, if there are any assumptions involved, it's not science. I think that completely decomposes. Then I don't think science is actually reliable. I think science must presuppose certain axioms of logic. And the axioms of logic for the Western world is there's a single unified mind, a rational mind, that created the universe and created our minds. So then we can use our minds to rationally observe the universe. And from that worldview, it started with like monasticism. That's like Gregor Mendel. If you are a biology guy or you've just heard it, like the Punnett squares and pea plants and all of that, like Mendelian genetics. If you've heard of those, like those types of ideas came from people who went to churches, went to monasteries, and they would just learn about the world. Because they believe there is a God and we can understand him by observing the world, right? That was the foundations of Western science. If you want to say, I don't like that definition, I want a different definition of science, that's fine. You can take the definition you want. That's my basis for understanding science. My basis for understanding science is that I'm able to arrive at a reasonable conclusion about the universe. I'm able to arrive at truth based on the assumption that truth exists and is knowable and is consistent across the universe, and our minds can arrive at it. And the reason I think that is possible is because the same source by which truth comes, by which the universe comes, by which our minds and consciousness comes, that single unified source is God, right? I need to clear out my inventory. I know that I had these organized and they immediately got really disorganized. Forgive me, but we're moving them all anyways, right? We're moving them all anyways, right? So if you say, I reject that definition of science, it's unscientific if you think science requires logic or God or truth or whatever. Like, okay, fine. But I don't really care to dispute that point in this video. That's my honest question, you know? I mean, that's my honest answer. I don't really care to dispute that point of the definition of science. I'm just stating and defining terms. When I say science, I'm going to be very clear. I'm going to be very clear throughout this video. I'm not saying that science is that God created the universe. I'm not saying that's what it is. I'm not saying God created the universe, therefore whatever we study is going to prove God. That's not my point. My point is that science is a methodology of arriving and understanding truth rationally by observing and testing the universe around us. So how do we determine if something's a scientific fact or a scientific truth? How do we determine that? What is the standard for something being a scientific fact? We call something a scientific fact if in our uniform and repeated experience, it's true. Why is it a scientific fact that water, H2O, has the chemical formula of H2O? Because in our uniform and repeated experience, in our uniform and repeated observations and tests, when we take photographs of them, when we perform chemical reaction, whatever it may be, we observe that water, the molecule of water, is composed of 2 hydrogens and 1 oxygen. And then it's like, well, what is hydrogen? What's the definition of hydrogen? Well, in our uniform and repeated experience, we observe that hydrogen is an atom with 1 proton, 1 neutron. And it's like, what's atom? Like, you can ask what anything is by science. And if you ask, how do we know that to be scientifically true? We say, we know something to be scientifically true based on the assumption that it is most reasonable to assume what we encounter repeatedly and uniformly should be held as true. Now this is where it gets us to evolution. What I just articulated with science is exactly how Charles Darwin viewed science. That's why Charles Darwin was a great scientist who arrived at many truths. Is because Charles Darwin, I'm not saying he was a theist, of course not, but Charles Darwin viewed a scientific fact is what we observe to be true in our uniform and repeated experience. So when Charles Darwin observed finches and he said, look, I see all these finches that have very similar body plans, except for this distinct adaptation where their beaks, morphology just means pertaining to the body plan, right? Where the beaks are different, and the source and cause of these differences in beaks, shape and size is the environment and what food they're eating. Their traits, their structures are suited for the environment. That's what Charles Darwin observed. And that's a logical and true and a verifiable observation even today. And so Charles Darwin constructed this methodology where he said, if we observe this to be in our uniform and repeated experience, we observe this to be true, the mechanism of natural selection, which I'll define what that is in a second. He said, I observe this to be true. Therefore, I think the inference to the best explanation is that is the same mechanism by which life diversified in the first place. So then Charles Darwin had this view of a universal common ancestor, right? Universal common descent. And if you've seen, like, if you read Darwin's Origin of Species, if you've seen Darwin's tree, you see this tree where he says every branch of that tree it represents the life on this earth. And we observe that life is very different, and those differences arrive through time and through adaptation to the environment. And he's saying, given enough time and given enough change to survival fitness, we could get the diversity of life we see today. And that's logically sound. That is a good explanation of how we got life on this earth. In theory, right? It, at the time, was the inference to the best explanation. And prior to Darwin, you know, there was like Lamarckism, where Lamarck was like, yeah, so you see a giraffe has a long neck because it needs to reach the apple on the tall tree. So then the giraffe, it's not that the giraffe in its lifetime grows a long neck, but it's more so Lamarck is like saying, since it needs to survive, it changes. And Darwin kind of stated a similar thing, but inverted, where he's saying, if it's not suited to survive, it doesn't survive, it dies off, so then nature selects what is most survivably fit. I hope that makes sense. I'm trying to explain evolution in a very common sense way. I'm trying to explain evolution in a very beginner friendly way. I'm trying to avoid jargon. If you don't understand, please comment where you don't understand. If you do understand, great. I'm glad you're with me. So Darwin had this view, and he said, in my uniform and repeated experience, I observe that life is very diverse, and the source of the diversity on this planet is survival fitness. The ability to survive. If you are fit to survive, it means you are well suited for that environment. And Charles Darwin postulated the reason organisms are fit to their environment is because the ones that aren't fit die. And that's really logical and intuitive. If you think about it, like that's just logical. Like, Darwin is making a logical argument based upon his observed experience. Darwin didn't have knowledge of DNA. He didn't have the knowledge we have today. He just took what he was able to observe and made a reasonable conclusion from it. Darwin had access to the fossil record, but the fossil record looked very different from how it looks today. And Darwin himself said, yeah, my theory, Darwin believed his theory. I'm not saying he didn't. I'm not saying Darwin did not believe his theory. Of course he did. But Darwin himself, in being an honest scientist, you know, I don't know him personally, right? It's just that's what I gather. Some Christians paint Darwin as like he's just this evil guy who wanted to destroy Christian. No, guys, evolution is not the death of Christianity. If you think so, you're crazy. And I'll explain why later in this video. I'm not going to be able to make every single point all at once. If you want to understand my view, you got to watch the whole video. And I'm not trying to keep you on the edge of your seat of like, well, what does ImageBear think? Does ImageBear think evolution's real or not? Keep watching. I'll explain. Charles Darwin took the evidence he had at his time and came to a logical, rational deduction. And the things he observed to be true, we observe to be true today. And he created, but he observed things that are the basis for much of what we understand biology today. As a Christian, I believe that. I honestly believe that. Darwin's not like my enemy, you know? That doesn't make any sense. Darwin observed the world and is trying to explain the world based on his observations. I think all people should do that. Whether you're an expert or not, you should do that. If you're an expert, you definitely should do that. So, Darwin's theory of evolution If I haven't been super clear, let me try to define it here. The theory of evolution postulated by Charles Darwin was based upon his discovery of natural selection. He didn't have understanding of genes and mutations. That's called neo-Darwinism. We'll get there. I'm talking about Darwin himself. Darwin himself observed natural selection. He observed fitness, that the traits best suited to survive will be selected naturally, you know? And this is where I don't want to get into jargon. If you're interested in a higher level biology video, I'd be interested in doing that. This is very like an introductory stuff. But if you're interested in like higher level stuff, and I can actually talk about like, well, the types of natural selection, you know, like there's mechanical selection, you know, and there's habitual, there's so many different things. And that's not even that high concept. But what gets really high concept is like once you get to the protein level, once you get to the subcellular level, but we're getting ahead of ourselves. Charles Darwin's view of evolution was simply the mechanism of natural selection is what causes small-scale adaptations. Small-scale adaptations are caused by natural selection. He didn't really elucidate what natural selection was explicitly, or the mechanism by how life adapts, I guess is a good way to put it. He more so said, I observe that in the environment where there are no seeds, there's only worms in the earth to eat, those birds have sharp beaks that puncture the ground. And I observe in environments where there is hard soil that no beak could penetrate, I see beaks that are very robust and thick and blunt, and they're used for cracking open nuts. And he observed with these finches and observed with many other organisms traits, distinct traits that were based and suited for the environment. So with that observation, he made an inference to the best explanation, which is the reason we see small scale changes over time is because of natural selection. So the diversity of life can be explained by that mechanism we observe. That's totally rational. Whether it's true or not is irrelevant to the rationality of it. That's what science is. We have hypotheses, we have theories, and we test them, and we see if they hold up. So Darwin himself, he was sure of his theory, but he himself admitted honestly, and I commend him for his honesty. All of us should be honest with all aspects of our theories and hypotheses. He said, the current fossil record seems to be in conflict with my theory, right? That was his view. You can see that in his writings. He himself had those doubts, not that he doubted his worldview, not that he thought he was wrong, not that he thought that the fossil record was some smoking gun that could not like his theory was irreconcilable. He didn't think that, but he just said our current evidence within the fossil record does not support this view of gradual change over time, right? So his view is we observe distinct traits in animals, in organisms, in life, and the distinction of these traits arrive about by natural selection. You with me? So he's saying the origin of life, the origin of species, come from this process. Given enough time, given enough natural selection, we can explain where life on Earth comes from. And the reason Darwin felt that the fossil record did not support this is because at his time, the fossil record showed bursts of life. It did not show gradual transitions. It did not show intermediate fossil body plans. What it demonstrated was we have a sudden we have a sudden burst of life in the fossil record, and we don't see any prior life existing it. We just see a burst of life. So why did he still hold his theory? Well, of course, science is the inference to the best explanation. So he thought, okay, natural selection is a really strong model for explaining diversity. If we have future discoveries of fossil records, maybe we'll find intermediate species. Maybe we'll uncover more gradual life forms, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that was I spent a long time, because it matters to understand these things. I'm not saying I'm an expert. If somebody says I've totally misrepresented Darwin and his view, go ahead, drop that comment. Go ahead, drop that comment. Let me know where I'm wrong. I don't think I'm wrong. I don't think anything I've said up until this point is hotly contested. You can disagree with me. Anyone has the right to disagree with me, but I don't think what I've said is actually hotly contested within the biological world, because of this is what I've learned. Again, this is anecdotal. This is my perspective. This is what I've learned as somebody who takes evolution classes, guys. I've taken several classes all about evolution. I took a class literally called Evolution and Ecology, where half the semester we talked about Darwin and his theory. And the rest of the semester, we talked about modern day evolution. Does that mean my professor's correct and I'm correct? No. My professor's not a Christian. I don't think any of my biology teachers at A&M have been Christians. If you want me to say, oh, I'm a Christian, therefore this is what I think, you're not going to be satisfied with this video, because I'm actually trying to engage in science and rational thought. I'm actually trying to engage with that. That being said, I've spent a long time explaining my view of science. I've spent a long time explaining what evolution is as posed by Darwin. Darwin lived hundreds of years ago. So what do we think now? What do biologists think now about the origin of life? We take a lot from Darwin that Darwin identified accurately and reasonably, very true aspects of descent with modification. And he observed natural selection. And he purported universal common descent. So then, does the science support that today, is the question. Does our science today support that? It's complicated. You're not going to like this video if you like black and white stuff. Biology's not all that black and white. Math is super black and white, because math operates on axioms that are meant for proofs. It's either right or it's wrong. Whereas biology is a different, it's a science, which science presupposes logic. And so within biology, we can't really prove things. We can demonstrate and observe things, and beyond a reasonable doubt, arrive at a truth. But the nature of biology, if you're a biologist or have taken a biology class, the nature of biology and classification is purely based on observation. And then with the elucidation of DNA, that opened up a whole lot more. There was a time where we classified animals and classified organisms by, their morphology, by reproduction, by their traits, by whatever. And then once we've sequenced different genomes, that really opened up the scope of how we're able to do biology. It's a new language of understanding biology, I guess you could say. Sorry, guys. I don't know why that required such focus there. So, is Darwin's model true? It's not that black and white, guys. It's like the heliocentric model. You know, when Galileo's like, actually, guys, I think the whole universe revolves around the sun. And then everyone's like, that's heresy. How could you suggest such a thing? And then it's like, okay, we observe that to be true, but we also observe much more, and our models evolve. Our model of evolution has evolved a lot. Our model of evolution has evolved a lot that we should question if the term evolution is even reliable anymore, in my opinion. Because again, it depends entirely upon how you define these things. If you define evolution as Darwin did, which is that there is universal common descent of all organisms, we have evidence to support that. We also have a lot of evidence against that. Let me give some evidence for universal common descent. Because again, my point of this video is it's complicated. Not that I have the right answers, but that I actually don't know the right answer, and I want to continue to explore scientifically the truth. And this is the point of the video where I need to make an important preface, because this whole video up until this point has already been prefaces. Why not add another preface? My loyalty is to what is true. My loyalty is to what is true. If all of life shares a universal common ancestor, if that's true, I will believe that. If life arrived on this earth abiotically, meaning without life, there was chemical evolution before evolution, if that is true, that's what I'll believe. I want to believe whatever is true. So if I'm wrong, correct me. And I'm willing to admit, yeah, I was wrong, or I misunderstood that, or whatever. So let's bring this back into Christianity as a Christian worldview. You know, if you're listening to this and you're a Christian and you're like, well, I think evolution's false. I think the universe is very young. It's like 10,000 years old. Maybe you're a Christian watching this and you're saying, I'm a theistic evolutionist. You know, I believe that evolution is an unguided random process, but I also do believe in God. And I think the universe is very old. Or maybe you're somewhere in the middle where you reject neo-Darwinism, but you still think geologically and cosmologically there's evidence for an old universe. My point is, Christianity is compatible with those views. Christianity is compatible with those views. Let's not make issues of science issues of essential doctrine, okay? Honest admission, I'm not a young earth creationist. I'm not. I used to be an avid young earth creationist. I believed so firmly in young earth creationism that I thought to deny young earth creationism is to deny God himself. It's to deny the Bible. So I used to be young earth creationist, and I'm not. Because I've seen compelling evidence that the universe is old. And if you're a Christian and you're a young earth creationist and you say, well, what if the universe just has the appearance of age? Okay. I can't falsify that. If we observe the universe to look old, is it old or does it have the appearance of age? I don't know. What if the universe is actually young, but it looks old? Then any evidence that it's old would just be to support it's old. So see what I'm getting at here? If you have an assumption that things can have the appearance of such without having such, then science is very open to a lot of different interpretations. So if you're a young Earth creationist and you say, yeah, I know that, when you look at sediment layers, when you look at the fossil record, it looks very old, but could not God just place those things there with the appearance of age? Sure. God I'm a Christian. I believe God could do things in whatever way he deems, right? If the earth is young, if the earth is old, however, I'm a Christian. So if you're an atheist and I'm losing you, sorry, this is a Christian channel. It's a Christian audience. You're welcome here. But I'm also, I want to do a service to the Christians listening who want me to give a clear Christian perspective answer. If God made the universe to be old, then it's old. If God made a younger universe, then it's young. My question is, how do we know? How do we know if the universe is old or young? We got to observe. We got to experiment. We got to explore. We got to look at the evidence and follow it where it goes. And as I look at the evidence, I see more evidence. I'm not saying I see no evidence of young Earth creationism. Sure, lots of ancient societies record a worldwide flood. That's true. That's a compelling point. Yeah, we see fossils on the top of high mountains. How did those get there? Was there a worldwide flood? I'm open to that. I also don't know because I wasn't there. That was Darwin's whole model. Darwin's whole model is I wasn't in the earth millions and billions of years ago. I couldn't observe it. But what systems do I observe presently? And if I observe these systems presently, then what is the inference to the best explanation? I think that's reasonable. I think that's a reasonable framework. So if you think the earth is young and you say the earth is young because the Bible teaches that, okay, then demonstrate to me biblically where the Bible teaches a young earth. I don't think the Bible teaches strictly a young earth. I'm not saying the Bible teaches an old earth. I don't think the Bible is a science textbook, and I'm affirmed in that. Augustine didn't think that Genesis had to be taken any particular chronological way. Here's my point, my long-winded point. If young Earth creationism is true, that's what I'll believe. If old Earth creationism is true, that's what I'll believe. If theistic evolution is true, that's what I'll believe. Whatever is true, I will believe it. And how do we know something to be true within the realm of science? We test our uniform and repeated experience. Okay? So now with all that being said, modern evolution. Why did I say modern evolution is complicated? Well, because there's evidence for Darwin's model and there's evidence against Darwin's model. Isn't that just let's take a moment here. If you're a scientist, if you enjoy science, isn't that the beauty of science? Is that we set rules and then nature continues to find ways to break rules. So we try to create better rules that explain the universe. To me, it's a mystery, and the beauty's in the mystery. I don't know the age of the universe because I wasn't there. But I see the strongest evidence within cosmology, within geology, within physics. I see the most evidence. The inference to the best explanation I see is that the universe is billions of years old. And if you say, well, it has the appearance of old age, it's not actually old, fair enough. That's consistent with the evidence. But if you're a young Earth creationist, have an equal standard, please. Because Darwin, and if you look at people like Richard Dawkins and Neo-Darwinism, if you look at what evolution is explaining things that appear to be designed, but are actually the product of randomness. So if you as a young Earth creationist say, look at the universe is designed by God. Look at this cell. You see this motor within the cell. You see engineering within cells. You see computer coding in genes. You see an engineering mind in nature. And if an evolutionist says to you, it only has the appearance of design. If you observe it, you could observe that it's designed. But scientifically, we just say it has the appearance of design and it's ultimately a random, unguided process. That claim that's an assumption. That's an unfalsifiable claim. And so is yours. If you say no amount of evidence will convince me the earth is old because the universe could appear old while being young, you can think that. I'm not saying that's illogical. But I'm just saying that's not, if we use Occam's razor, if we use simplest explanation with fewest assumptions, then within science, within the inference to the best explanation, if the universe appears to be old, we'd just say the universe is old, right? And I think it goes the same way with design. If we observe design in the universe, why wouldn't we assume it's designed? And if somebody says, well, to assume it's designed is to say there's a God, and there is no God scientifically, why can't we observe God to be true within science? Well, because science is the natural world, and God by definition is outside the natural world. There you go. It's back to circular definitions, right? I'm not that interested in the definitions. If you're a young earth creationist and you're just convinced of that, you can think that. If you're a theistic evolutionist and you're convinced of that, you can think of that. You can think of that. If you're an atheist and you're convinced of neo-Darwinism, you can think that. I'm not trying to convince anyone here, guys. I'm explaining my view. All right? I'm explaining my view. All right? Anyways, cortisol spike. I'm fighting imaginary antagonists. I've said 3 different times, and each time it's like 10, 20 minutes apart of evidence for, evidence against evolution. So Darwin's view of natural selection, that's true. Natural selection is observably true, like peppered moths, for example. A peppered moth, if you never heard that example in school, you know, there's these moths of the same species, but some of them in their genetic expression are black and some of them are white. And the black butterflies, moths, the black peppered moths, they blend in really well on, say, this brick here, this deep slate. A black moth is camouflaged really well. But with the industrialization age, there was a lot of soot that covered up the bark of these trees. So then, instead of the bark of the tree looking black like this, they started to look white. And now if a black moth is on these white trees, it's not camouflaged anymore. It's easy to pick it out and eat it if you're a predator. You know, and predation, predators and prey, that's one of the means of natural selection, right? You know, you've got competition, you have predation, you have all these different things, okay? I don't want to get lost in biological jargon and definitions. There are many instances of natural selection. That's true. No one denies that in biology. No Christians even deny that. If they do deny that, I'm not with them on that subject, you know? We're unified in our love of Christ. I'm not with you on your view of natural selection, okay? Natural selection is true. Here's what Darwin didn't elucidate, to which neo-Darwinism has postulated a model, okay? So Darwinism is simply the theory that there's universal common ancestry by natural selection. And if you are confused at this point in the video because you haven't heard me once mention genes in mutation, there's a reason I haven't mentioned mutations up until this point. Darwin had no knowledge of DNA or genes or genetic mutations or that traits are expressed by DNA. He didn't know that. His theory was the inference to the best explanation. He took what he was able to observe and he arrived at an explanation. And so now we have DNA. We say, we know where body plans come from. You know, we've got Hox genes. We've got these genes that regulate body plans and in fetal development, we see like these are the genes that make sure that an arm goes here and a leg goes there and the brain develops in this way. And we know that all of those things are genetically determined. They're determined by genes. That's such a remarkable scientific discovery. This is one of my favorite scientific discoveries. Thanks, Thomas and Crick. What's their first names? I should know this because I just am like bragging about. Why can't I? Heck, what the heck? Why can't I go down here? There we go. I don't know their first names. I'm looking it up because I don't want to be a fool. But Watson and Crick. Why am I saying Thomas and Crick? I'm a fool. See, guys, I'm a fool. I'm talking about how much I love DNA, and I messed up the guy's name who elucidated it. I know Crick very well. I don't. Watson, I'm not as... Whatever. Watson and Crick elucidated the structure of DNA. You know, DNA is the double helix structure. It is the genetic information by which all of life is expressed. It's pretty neat. It's pretty nifty. Thanks, Watson and Crick. I don't know why I said Thomas. I'm trying to think what scientist is Thomas that I'm confusing this with. Whatever. See, I don't know everything. I'm a fool sometimes. Smash like for being a fool sometimes. Watson and Crick elucidated the double helix structure of DNA, and that prior to Watson and Crick, the view was that proteins are the information-bearing molecule, right? That proteins are the mechanism by which life has its properties, I guess. I'm trying to speak in a common sense way. And then we discovered, oh wait, proteins are the expression based upon DNA, which is the information. That's what Watson and Crick elucidated, is this molecule, DNA, this double helix molecule. It's a beautiful molecule. Look up a picture of it. That molecule, guys, we need more calcite. Oh, how did we run out so fast? Let's go get some more, shall we? Let's get more calcite. This is going to be a long video, I fear. But I hope you enjoy it. If you've made it to this point in the video, please consider subscribing. It's totally free. You can always change your mind. Here's the problem. That other geode we usually go to, like over there, I think we've gotten most of the calcite from it. So we kind of need to go on a random cave adventure to find a new geode. So let's go on a cave adventure. But that means we're probably going to die because I'm not that good at Minecraft, in all honesty. Besides the point. Proteins are what are expressed, and specifically like enzymes, right? I just this is my channel. I could talk about whatever I want whenever I want. You know, I don't have to make a clear argument. I could go on side tangents. Basically, in life, there are these fundamental macromolecules or macronutrients. Lipids, which are like fats, you know, fats, cholesterols, hormones, steroids, etc. Carbohydrates, you know, like sugars, starches. There's proteins, which proteins are built by amino acids, and there's about 20 amino acids that are used naturally for building proteins. There's about 20, but you know, it's a more everything in science is more complicated than that. You know, probably anything in this video you can find a scientific exception. You know, so like carbohydrates, you know, there's sugars and starches. Complex sugars come from simple sugars, you know, like all of them are essentially like glucose derivatives. Lipids, you know, fats, they come from, they have like a hydrophilic and hydrophobic end, and they gather, you know, like fats are they're their own thing. Proteins their own thing. Carbs their own thing. Nucleic acids are their own thing. So DNA is a type of nucleic acid, right? Deoxyribonucleic acid. And then RNA is ribonucleic acid, where RNA is a single strand of genetic information, as opposed to DNA, which is a double-stranded double helix. Anyways, we thought that proteins were, prior to Watson and Crick's elucidation of DNA as the information-bearing molecule, We thought that proteins were the information molecule. And then thanks to Watson and Crick, we found out that DNA actually is what encodes for proteins, and proteins are important, incredibly important to biology and biochemistry. Protein is essentially by which all things work. And when I say protein, if you're not a biology dude or gal, I don't need iron. Why am I doing this? I'm looking for a geode. Anyways. I'm grabbing granite so that, like, as I descend into the caves, I can, like, create kind of a trail of, like, where to go so I don't get lost. Hi, creeper. Blow up. Oh, 2 for the price of 1. Bang. Whoa, whoa, whoa. 3! 3 for the price of 1. Is there a 4th? Oh, there's a 4th! Is there a 5th? Ah, no. There's a 5th! There's a 5th! Boom. I'm just tanking my shield. That was hilarious. That's going to be a YouTube short, folks. Almost definitely that's the YouTube short for today. So proteins, specialized proteins are enzymes. Amino acids are the subunit of proteins. So what DNA does in an incredibly reductive view, okay? It's incredibly reductive, and the entire mechanism of DNA and how it works is beyond even my understanding. So I'm just going to speak about it in a very simple way. And if you want to be there's a 6th. The shield is dead. Because I should be killing these guys rather than just let them blow up. I want a geode so bad. If you want to be a keyboard warrior and say, like, you don't understand DNA because you're explaining it so simply. Like, I'm trying to explain in an understandable way. I don't feel like I don't think it's a display of intelligence to use big words, or I don't think it's a display of intelligence to say, look at how much I know. Ha ha ha. I took classes for this. I think a display of intelligence is to try to explain things in a way that anyone can understand. So hopefully I'm avoiding jargon, and when I do use jargon, I can define it. So very simply, what about this video has been simple, by the way? Very simply, what DNA does in a highly reductive, yes, highly reductive, I admit that it's highly reductive. What DNA does is it contains these nucleic bases, these nitrogenous bases, if you will. Come on, geode. Where's a geode? Cytosine, thymine, adenine, guanine, and sometimes uracil. If you don't want to remember that, ATGC, sometimes U. That is the language of DNA. The sequence of those letters, those characters, the sequence of DNA code is what determines, put this amino acid attached to this amino acid, attached to this amino acid in this way, and it constructs. So the DNA itself has information, and then there's this entire genetic matrix by which it takes and unzips the double strand, and it reads the sequence of ATGC. So A goes to T, G goes to C. In other organisms, there'll be U instead of T, right? I believe. This is again where I don't know everything. I don't remember what uracil replaces. I don't know everything. Correct me in the comments. It's something that, like, if I read it, I know it. But it's not like I'm not an expert. I'm not an expert. Just a guy sharing perspectives. And I want to reveal ignorance because I'm an American. I like being honest about what I don't know. I think that asking questions, revealing your ignorance, revealing what you don't know, I think it's beneficial to gain understanding, and it's beneficial to humility. So I don't know everything. And I don't think I'm right about everything. But everything I think I'm right about, I think I'm right. Like, that's true with everyone. If you think you're right, you think you're right, but you don't think you're right about everything, you know? So, what DNA does is it bears the information, it bears the language, it bears the code of AT, GC, AT, GC, AT, AT, GC, GC, whatever. It has these sequences of information. I'm getting that, dude. I'm never gonna pass up diamonds, no matter how tricky they are to get. I'm not trying to go mining diamond. What? Diamond mining. I want a geode, but I can't pass up diamonds. For the 50th time, what DNA does, I'm going to say that 80 more times before I actually get to the point. DNA bears information. It bears a sequence. And that sequence is read and translated into create this amino acid chain, which an amino acid chain, a peptide chain, that's a protein. And proteins' function is determined by their structure, right? That's like the basic rule of chemistry, basic rule of biology, physiology, etc., is that structure determines function. So for the longest time, and when I say longest time, I actually don't know how long. I shouldn't say for the longest time. I should say prior to the elucidation of DNA, it was reasonable to assume, okay, the structure of protein, what the heck? Leave me alone. This is scary, guys. I don't want to die down here, but there's so many diamonds. Oh, my greed consumes me. It was reasonable to, oh gosh, will these blow up even though I'm so much higher than them? Oh, if you knock me down and I die, that's sad. Stop it. Get some help. It's reasonable to assume prior to the elucidation of DNA that protein, okay, protein structure is determined by its function. Sorry, its function is determined by its structure. What the heck? Did he ride up the water spout and then blow up? Crazy. DNA changes the picture a little bit. Because DNA, the information of DNA, it's not structural information. It's actually specified complexity. The information of DNA is specified complexity. And how do I illustrate this? Let's illustrate it. We're going to do something funky here. Okay, folks? This is going to be interesting. But this is the best way I know how to explain this concept. So bear with me. So the idea that structure determines function, you know, structural information. So if you look at like in a nucleus, like, what's a simple to understand way? You know, look at bones in the human body. The structure of bone is a long, rigid mass that's not really flexible. So its function is it gives structure. Whereas what about muscle? You know, what's the structure of muscle? Well, muscle is actually like these fibers. I need one more. That's so annoying. Muscle are these contractile fibers. And it's like, okay, so their structure is flexible. That's their function, is they flex. Bones and their structure are not flexible, so they give structure, right? So, and then those are macroscopic structures. Cells have those microscopic structures within them, you know, and within the DNA matrix, those types of things exist, you know. So I just explained what structural information is. But what about, I said specified information, specified complexity. This is gonna be so funny, but oh man, stop it. I'm trying to teach something here. If I type in that, is that information? Yeah, it's information. What do we do with that information? We don't really know. What about that? It's roughly the same amount of information. I say hello, but that means something. What the point I'm illustrating here is that specified complexity is determined by a sequence, and from that sequence, there is a derived meaning. Okay? So even though from the perspective of like structure and quantity, it's the same. You know, if that sign were a piece of paper, if I were to write a bunch of random letters in a random sequence, if I were to write that out, the same chemical interactions and chemical bonding, that's what ink is. Like ink bonds to paper. So the same exact chemical process of me writing gibberish on a piece of paper, that exact same chemical process governs when Shakespeare writes something. Except Shakespeare, oh my gosh, dude. This is so, oh, I'm cooked. Without a shield, creepers are so scary. Speaking of scary, this whole thing is scary. Oh my gosh, without a shield, this is so bad. Without a shield, this is so bad. This is so bad. This is so tragic. This game, man, I'm so bad at it. I hate caves. I hate going in caves. I want to go to a geode where I know where the geode is. I'm going to smelt some iron so I don't die. Oh, dude, I can't make a furnace without... Am I just cooked? Because... Oh, no. Look at this. Big brain strat. The creeper dropped some cobble deep slate, and I'm going to transform this into... Oh my gosh, this is so humiliating. But whatever. Specified complexity versus complexity, right? We're talking about different types of information here. So the same chemical processes that bond ink to a paper, but one series of information can have a totally different meaning than another series. DNA has specified complexity. And what I mean by DNA has specified complexity, I mean that based on the sequence of the DNA base pairs, right? ATGC, based upon, I keep using the diamond one, based upon the sequence, it provides information to be read and translated into amino acid sequences, and then that amino acid sequence is built. So DNA bears the information that encodes proteins. Remember how I said this can be complicated? Charles Darwin didn't know that mechanism. Charles Darwin didn't understand that. Which, why should he? We barely understand it. So we see information in DNA. And, you know, like people like Bill Gates, people like Richard Dawkins, people who are not Christians, they themselves say, yeah, DNA is like analogous. Am I going to have enough fuel? These signs, how are these signs going to do? Will one sign get me one ingot? Let's pray. People like Bill Gates, people like Richard Dawkins, all types of evolutionary biologists who are not atheists would themselves say that DNA is like a computer code. It is the same information mechanism. Like if you're listening to this and you're an engineer and you're going to work at Boeing or you're going to work at Lockheed or whatever you're going to work at, these companies use a technology where a computer reads a sequence of information and then that computer translates that sequence of information into an actual mechanical output. That's the exact mechanism by which life has its mechanisms. The reason you have arms and legs, the reason you have eyes, the reason that all aspects of life are determined genetically within the realm of science. Of course, you know, we get into the whole nature versus nurture stuff. I don't care to get into that this video, because even within nature versus nurture, oh man, it's just treacherous no matter where I go. I just want a geode, man. Oh my gosh, and these fools won't stop following me. Oh my gosh, bro. I'm cooked. I'm cooked, and I'm gonna die. I hate this game. I hate this game. I hate this game. I hate this game. I don't like it. I love it. I love this game. I don't hate it. That's not nice. Hate is a strong word. How do I even get back there, dude? Oh. Smash like for Minecraft humiliation mode. I'm so terrible at Minecraft, but that's content, right? Let's flipping go. Anyways, we have these mechanisms in engineering where a sequence of code, of computer code, a series of information in a sequential order determines... Why am I doing this? The sequence determines the output, right? Back to what I was saying with nature versus nurture. I don't really care to get into that. The reason I don't really care to get into that is because both sides can... With both assumptions, you can prove both, right? Because if you hold genetic determinism and somebody's like, well, what about a person who, you know, identical twins? You know, identical twins, they have the same exact genes, but their life looks different. And it's like, well, yeah, because the environment is acting upon those genes, and then those genes express differently, right? So I don't care to get into that. What does this have to do with evolution? What does DNA have to do with evolution? What does DNA have to do with our understanding of evolution and the origin of life? And how does DNA fit into that picture? The reason I share all of this is because in neo-Darwinism, right? Darwinism is this model of there's universal common descent. I mean, there's descent with modification. Over time, things adapt and change over time. That's evolution. If you want evolution as like a 4-year-old understanding, it's change over time. If we define evolution as change over time, that's irrefutably true. Yep, I agree. Change over time, correct. But if we say change over time proves universal common ancestry, that's something entirely different. If you want my personal views, I'm not convinced of universal common descent. I'm not. The idea that there's a unified scientific consensus on that is deeply overstretched. There are lots of non-Christians. It's not just Christians. It's not just theists. There are lots of secular biologists, evolutionary biologists who meet and talk for the last decades about the flaws in the Darwinian model, okay? So... Oh, I didn't make a shield. A sunk cost fallacy. Sunk cost fallacy. We're in too deep. We're just going to send it. Oh, dead end. Well, I mean, it's not too late if I just grab iron right now. So, again, I'm getting ahead of myself because these concepts are important to describe. If you are asking, well, why don't you believe in universal common descent? I'll get there. This is gonna be such a long video. Holy moly. This is probably gonna be one of my longer videos, to be honest. Or I'm gonna have to leave and cut it short and say part 1. Stay tuned for part 2. So if we define evolution as change over time, that's true. Change over time is true. If we define evolution as change over time as a random, unguided process by which all things are derived from a universal common ancestor, That's not proven to be true. I'm not saying it's false. That's not proven to be true. Wait, this is awesome. Do I just dig straight down? Epic. I hope that... That's so nice. Okay, yes, let's go. That was so easy. Father, forgive me for my complaints. That was not that... Like, I was so dramatic. It was so easy to get stuff back. I love that quality of life mod. If you think that's cheating, sorry, I don't care. It makes Minecraft fun, and video games are about having fun. It's only cheating if I'm lying about, you know? Anyways. What was my point? I was so excited about finding my stuff, and then I'm like, what am I talking about? Anyways. Oh, yeah. If you define evolution as change over time, that's true. If you define evolution as an unguided process by which the mutation of genes over time confer survival adaptation, we have a lot of reasons to be skeptical of that. I'm tying together lots of different concepts, and hopefully this is the point where everything kind of intersects. Hopefully this is the point where everything kind of intersects. I described in detail Darwin's theory of evolution. I described in detail our common understanding of genes and how genes are actually how we understand the diversity of things on Earth. That genes bear the information that encode for proteins of a certain type in a certain sequence, and then the structure of those proteins determine their function within the cell. That is just a genetics 101, evolution 101. It's way more complicated than that. It's way more nuanced than that. I'm not trying to say this is what it is as simple as possible. I'm not saying this is what it is. I'm just trying to say it simply. And if you guys want a deeper dive video, I'd love to do that. I'll actually do some more research. Maybe I'll script it. Maybe I'll have a more clear, but this is just what's it called? This is just a stream of consciousness I'm recording. I don't feel bad with this video, making this video, because it's a video on my opinion. It's my view. I'm not an expert. If you disagree, disagree. If I'm wrong, give me evidence why I'm wrong. Go ahead. I'm willing to discuss, and I'm open-minded. So our neo-Darwinism, back to my point of we're tying this all together, I need to make a shield. I have to. It is a requirement. It is a requirement to make a shield to survive in this world. So, neo-Darwinism is the view where we take our understanding of DNA, the mechanism of DNA, and we apply that to Darwin's model of universal common descent. Are you with me? Does that make sense? It's neo-Darwinism, where neo means new. We take Darwin's model, his inference to the best explanation, and we say, yo, Darwin, we have observed more things to be true now. So let's add some nuance to your view, homeboy. That's what science is, after all. It's arriving at the best explanation of the observable universe. This is so treacherous, my friends. But I want a geode so bad. The Lord is so good. The Lord is so good. Thank you for a geode, Father in heaven. How am I going to get to it? First, I'm going to handle this creeper. Whoa. Leave me alone. And you leave me alone also. Cool. We're just going to do this the good old-fashioned way, friends. Let's do it like this, where we just stack up. We're going to have to dump some things in our inventory because I should have brought a water bucket. Why didn't I bring a water bucket? I don't know. Wasn't very forward thinking. I had no idea that we were going to run out of calcite and go on this adventure. I just thought we were going to be working on the house this episode, and then we ran out of materials. So that's on me. So we have applied our current evidence to Darwin's model, and that's where we arrive at neo-Darwinism. Awesome. So, why do I reject neo-Darwinism? Because I do reject neo-Darwinism. I don't want to beat around the bush. I don't want to act like, see guys, I agree with you. I'm not a theistic evolutionist. I don't hold theistic evolution. I don't. I'm also not a young earth creationist. Don't put me in any box. I'm open to what the science teaches. I don't know naturally where life comes from. If science is, we must explain everything within our current understanding of natural law, I don't know where life came from. I don't. So if you do know where life came from, teach me, please. Because as I study it, I just am more and more confused, and then I want to seek the answer. Why am I confused where life comes from purely supposing naturalism? Because again, scientifically, I think I know where life came from. I have a theory and a hypothesis of where life came from by using inference to the best explanation. That criterion and methodology I stated in the beginning, the criterion by which Darwin tried to understand the universe, which was uniform and repeated experience. When I look at uniform and repeated experience, if that's what science is, if we define science as materialism, the naturalists have the same circular logic problem that Christians have. How do you know something's true? We observe it in the material world. How does observing something in the material world prove that it's true? Because we observe it in the material world. But why is that true? Because that's what we observe. Right? That's the epistemology of it. And I'm not saying that's a bad epistemology. I'm just saying all attempts to arrive at truth require assumptions. So for me, I'm not going to presuppose naturalism. If naturalism is true, I'll believe it. If materialism is true, I will believe it. But to act like naturalism is a logical flow from science is unfaithful to science. To suggest that science proves naturalism, I don't see the logical flow there. And if I'm misrepresenting anyone's views, explain to me scientifically how you have arrived at materialism. But I'm not a materialist, so I'm not going to make an argument from a materialist perspective. I'm a scientist, so I'm going to use the methodology of inference to the best explanation. First of all, I think I'm getting ahead of myself. Why am I offering my own hypothesis in the first place? And when I say my own, it's not my own. You know, millions of people believe what I believe. Thousands of scientists believe what I believe. It's not just like, oh, Christians agree with me. Lots of Christians disagree with me. Lots of Christians are young earth creationists. Lots of Christians are theistic evolutionists. You know, I'm neither of those things. So why do I reject neo-Darwinism? What is the evidence for Darwinism? What is the evidence against Darwinism? I think morphology is an interesting evidence for Darwinism. And what morphology means is like body plans. So we see like similarity in body plans, right? We see similarity in the phalanges of mammals. So even something like a whale, it's like, oh, look, it has a wrist that articulates with phalanges. And then we see it's a very similar structure to bats, and a very similar structure to primates. And over time, that universal member, that universal appendage, that morphology, over time, it could be distinguished by natural selection to fit the environment. On paper, theoretically, that makes sense. But again, we get to the problem then of how is that explanation any more reasonable than the explanation that that universal structure is required for that universal function, right? Because it's not as if whales use their morphology for something different. The fins and flippers of mammals are used in the same way that our appendages are used, motility. So I think somebody could say, well, out of structural necessity, that's how they arise. So maybe, like, hear me out. I'm not saying this is what I believe. I'm just saying, hear me out. I'm just talking about reasonable explanations. Why couldn't those things evolve independently? And guess what, guys? This is not me saying this as a Christian. Go look it up. Look up convergent and divergent evolution. That's something that our model of evolution is compatible with. The current model of evolution is that there are things that evolve in a convergent way and in a divergent way. Right? I can't think of any scientist who thinks that all of human life came about by an actual single cell organism. What most people who believe in abiogenesis that I've talked to, whether scholars or non-scholars, that would have been bad. Whether scholars or non-scholars, most people would say, well, bacteria arose independently from eukaryotes, and archaea arrived independently of bacteria and eukaryotes, right? Which a eukaryote is a cell with a nucleus, a prokaryote is a cell without a nucleus. Sorry for the jargon. Let me make sure I define those jargony terms. So, we see morphology similarities, right? We see similarities in body plans. Why does similarities in body plans necessarily support logically universal common descent? I don't think it necessarily does. And it also doesn't, it necessarily doesn't. That's what scientific theory is about. Is we try to understand what's rational and reasonable. I think that an explanation of similarities in morphology is universal common descent, but I don't think necessarily it requires universal common descent. But then what about other evidences for evolution? So something like DNA similarities, right? Something that is like commonly cited is like humans share 99% DNA with chimpanzees. Therefore, we evolved from like a common ancestor. It's interesting. It's an interesting perspective that I think is often misrepresented because I'm pretty sure humans have 70% similarity with bananas genetically. I'm going to look this up. I'm just running all over the place. Let me get to a safe spot to look this up because I'm actually appealing to a fact and I want to be correct about it. What percent similarity DNA do humans have with banana? I don't know if it's banana or strawberry. 40 to 60% of our genes are shared with bananas. So do we say, okay, 40 to 60% of our genes are shared with bananas, so bananas share a common ancestor with us, but since there's a greater disparity between the shared genes, then there must be a greater distance of time and natural selection between us. Sure, sure. But again, with DNA similarity, I think it's the same problem with morphological similarity, which is, what if DNA is just what if genes are universal in their composition and structure and how they're interpreted, but the sequence of them is what determines how it's expressed. That's how DNA works, by the way, because we might share 99% of our genes with monkeys. That doesn't mean we're 99% similar to monkeys in our expression. You know, we're 60%, we share 40 to 60% of our genes with bananas. Doesn't mean that we're 40, 60% similar. Like, that data is often misrepresented and misunderstood. I'm not saying, therefore, we don't share common ancestors with other primates. I'm not saying that. I don't know. I wasn't there. That's my whole point, is I'm trying to have intellectual modesty and honesty. I wasn't there. I don't know. If the evidence supports universal common descent, that's what I'll believe. If the evidence supports something else, I'm going to believe something else. So with genetic similarities and with morphological similarities, what about fossil record? You know, do we see transitions from species to species in the fossil record? We don't. That was Darwin's doubt. Darwin didn't doubt his theory. He believed his theory to be true, but he also had the humility, the intellectual humility, to say the fossil record currently does not support my theory, but he believed as we continue to discover, maybe we'll find more intermediate fossils, which is reasonable. We don't know yet, so let's keep exploring. And we have much more access than Darwin does. We have much more access to fossil records than Darwin does. We know much more about fossils than Darwin did. Darwin and Darwinian proponents, you know, this view of like, well, what if there are these intermediate species, but they're not preserved? Okay, that's fair. Like, on paper, that's reasonable. So let's address that. There are intermediate species. We just don't observe them in the fossil record. That could be true, right? A historical event occurred, even if we don't know about it. If it occurred. Excuse me, that was gross. Whether or not we have a historical record of an event, if that event occurred, it occurred, independent of our knowledge of it, right? So when you think about history, history is very similar to Darwin's model of understanding the past. Darwin understands the past by inference to the best explanation. You know, that's how we do our history too. And if you think about it, evolution is just like biological history. The difference between science and history, however, is the model of like uniform and repeated experience, right? In history, if we don't have a record of the event, we don't know about it. Whereas with science, it's like we don't have a current record, but we could test things and we could see, based on how things work today, could they have worked that way in the past? That's reasonable. So then, this idea of there could be universal common ancestry, but just because the fossil record doesn't support it, doesn't mean it's false. I agree. Just because we don't have these transition fossils does not mean Darwinian evolution is false. I'm not saying that. Don't make conclusions I'm not making. And I know you're already like commenting this video, like, what about Tiktaalik? What about Archaeopteryx? What about XYZ? Yeah, there are animals, you know, like a fish with legs, a proto-fish. It's like, okay, look, here's a fish that looks like a fish that was the intermediate between land and sea. Sure. I'm not disagreeing with that. Or Archaeopteryx. It's like, look, here's kind of a proto bird. You know, it's like this was the jump from reptile to bird. Sure, go ahead. Under modern like genetic evolution, like this is just an interesting fact because I mad respect to my biology professor at Texas A&M. Mad respect to that guy. He was like his specialty was in birds. Loved bird watching, loved studying and researching birds. Under genetic evolution models of classification, like birds are just considered reptiles, right? And then again, that's just back to definitions of like, do we define things morphologically or do we find them genetically? Because genetically, a lot of people are saying, yeah, well, birds are just reptiles, which like that I have no problem with that. That makes sense genetically to say that. So why am I saying I reject universal common descent if I'm saying that there does exist like certain intermediates? Where am I? Oh, there I am. Hey, there's my house. That was, we died, but it was successful in a sense because we got our stuff back. Yes, there exists demonstrations of species that appear to be intermediate species. That's not really what I'm talking about when I say the fossil record is in conflict with Darwin's model. Darwin himself admitted the fossil record is in conflict with his theory. And in modern science, we observed even more issue with Darwin's theory. And here's why. First of all, logically, if you don't care about the science and you want to use your common sense and logic, and you're just saying, yo, image bearer, it sounds like if you start with the assumption that everything has the appearance of design, but it's not designed, then anything you observe is going to support naturalism. That would be correct. If you start with the assumption of materialism, all that you observe can support materialism. If you start with the assumption of theism, everything you observe can affirm theism, right? So why do I say scientifically there's conflict between the fossil record and Darwin's theory? We have preservations of soft-bodied microscopic materials, embryos. We have a lot of things that have been preserved. A lot. We have soft tissue that's been preserved and soft-bodied organisms that have been preserved, like embryos, for example. We also observe things like the Cambrian explosion. We're about, what, 500 million years ago? I think the Cambrian explosion. Again, fact check me. I don't know. This is not scripted. All my videos are unscripted. I don't have notes. I'm just going off of prior knowledge and common sense. And if that makes me lack intellectual integrity, fine. Sue me. Roughly 500 million years ago. Fact check me. Could be wrong. I don't have every number and statistic memorized. And with the Cambrian explosion, that is one of many instances of a boom in complex animal body plans. You know, like specifically in the case of the Cambrian explosion, like arthropods. You know, so organisms with segmented bodies and exoskeletons that have a nervous system. We just see those animals appear. You know, and fish. We see like ancient fish too, I think, in the Cambrian period. These are complex animals. And we see no prior pre-existing life forms. The Cambrian explosion is one of many explosions of life. That's what gave rise to the view of punctuated equilibrium. You know, and I think punctuated equilibrium just got laughed out of the scientific discourse. I'm not saying I believe in scientific equilibrium necessarily. Again, I'm very agnostic on these issues. I don't necessarily know for myself. I'm trying to investigate more and come to a reasonable conclusion. But punctuated equilibrium is basically it's similar to Darwin, but also inverted. Because Darwin is saying there's this unbroken, slow modification over time. And I actually don't know who I don't actually know who postulated punctuated equilibrium, but essentially punctuated equilibrium, if you look it up, it's the view that life evolves in sudden bursts and then stasis. Things change rapidly for some reason. There's mass diversity of life that we observe, and then there's stasis. And people are like, that's wrong because it disagrees with Darwinism, which I agree, that's not compatible with Darwinism, but that view's a more accurate description of the fossil record. But again, my whole point is we don't just look at the fossil record. We don't just look at the fossil record. We don't just look at natural selection. We don't just look at DNA. We look at everything. We try to understand everything by observing everything. Okay? So, if you're a Christian and you believe in young earth creationism, believe it because that's scientifically the inference to the best explanation. If you're a Christian and you hold theistic evolution, believe that because it is the inference to the best explanation. Defend your position. I'm saying this with honesty and love in my heart, okay? I'm not trying to offend anyone. I'm not trying to rage bait. I'm saying this with honesty. The most religious people I've ever talked about evolution and biology with are atheists. Atheists tend to be the most radically blind faith individuals on these topics. Like Darwin is their Jesus and evolution is their God. Because if I say, okay, how does Darwinism explain that the rate by which genes mutate in a defective way far outweighs the rate by which you can confer a positive mutation? Well, I don't know. I don't know how to explain that. But evolution did get us here. It's like, that's a presupposition because you're defining evolution as naturalism and materialism. If we're taking evolution to be what Darwin meant, which is universal common ancestry based upon natural selection, we can say we observe instances of common ancestry. We observe instances of natural selection being the mechanism by which traits arrive and diversify. But we've also gained new understanding, which is natural selection acts upon genes and genes are expressed. And the current neo-Darwinian model is the model that genes mutate over time. Genes change and mutate over time. So if you give enough time and enough mutation, let it roll, baby, then we'll get here with all the diversity of life we have. I'm not trying to rage bait. That's an appeal to an unknown just as much as God is. You can call my view a God of the gaps view. Sure. But just because you define your view as a scientific view or as a materialist view, like that doesn't like it's like David Hume. It's just like David Hume's epistemology. It's totally circular. You know, miracles are impossible. The supernatural is by definition impossible because it violates the laws of nature. And if you violate the laws of nature, it's impossible. Why is it impossible? Because miracles violate the laws of nature. Why is that impossible? Because you can't violate the laws of nature. See what I mean? And I'm not against self-referential systems. I'm not against making assumptions to arrive at truth. I'm just saying, what's the most reasonable assumption? So when I look at DNA, when I look at the fossil record, when I look at how life exists presently, I don't think that universal common ancestry is the best explanation. And I don't think that chemical evolution or abiogenesis is the best explanation to how life got here. And I don't think that natural selection acting upon genetic mutation, I don't think that's the best explanation either. That's my view. It's that simple. And if you're watching this video, you're like, why are you saying God? Why'd you waste your time watching this full video if you're going to make some conclusion that I'm saying God did it because I don't understand? I'm not saying I don't know how life got here, therefore God did it. Theistic evolutionists believe in the same God that I believe in. They believe in Jesus, and they believe humans share a common ancestor with monkeys. And they believe that life came about on this earth through abiogenesis, that the natural law is guided by God. I have no problems with evolution if it's true. And when I say evolution, I don't mean change over time, because change over time is true. Natural selection is true. Descent with modification is true. When I say evolution, I am saying universal common descent, universal common ancestry, that all of life on Earth today derives from a same root. I'm skeptical of that view. I'm not saying it's false. I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm saying I'm skeptical of it. I've already admitted several times in this theory, I've already admitted several times in this video that theoretically that's plausible. At the time of Darwin, it was the inference to the best explanation. I don't think presently that's the inference to the best explanation. So then what do I think is? What do I think is the inference to the best explanation of how life got on this earth? I hold the hypothesis of intelligent design. If you disagree with intelligent design, that's fine. What do I mean by intelligent design? Well, if the most fundamental process of life by which all of life is determined based on our current understanding of science is the DNA molecule. And the DNA molecule is an example of specified complexity. It's information. In our uniform and repeated experience, we observe that information comes from intelligence. In our uniform and repeated experience, we observe that information comes from a source of intelligence. Computer codes come from an intelligent source. Written language comes from an intelligent source. So now if I am saying that is unscientific because you're appealing to something outside of what is material, that's not unscientific. Because when you think about writing a story, when you explain in terms of materialism what's occurring, you can explain the composition of the paper. You can explain the chemical properties of the ink. You can explain how the ink is bonded to the paper. You can explain the organism that is writing it and the physiology and the neurochemistry behind how it is doing that. But under materialism, there is no explanation for information and intelligence. And if you're saying, whoa, image bear, yeah, I agree. We can't explain that with materialism yet, but I'm holding out hope that one day we will. I'm holding out hope too. That's the whole point of this video. I'm holding out hope that we can understand the process naturally where minds and intelligence and information comes from. But in my uniform and repeated experience, I have only ever observed information, specifically specified complexity information. I have only observed that being derived from an intelligent source. So I believe it's the inference to the best explanation that life, which life is dependent necessarily upon the information of DNA, if biology is dependent necessarily on information, I think the inference to the best explanation is that life came about by an intelligent source. That's how modest my view is. I'm not saying it's God. I'm not saying it's I believe in God. I do believe in God. I think that the hypothesis of intelligent design has religious and theological and metaphysical implications. That's true of all science in a sense. All of science has implications greater than what is material. If you believe in minds, if you believe in consciousness, if you believe in information. But if you reject information, I don't understand how you can rationally understand DNA, because DNA is not structural information. It's not information based on its composition. It's not information based purely and strictly on strong and weak nuclear forces. In the same way that you can describe a person writing a story, you can explain it through materialism, but you can't explain through materialism strictly what it means. How are we able to interpret specified complexity as humans? We can't explain that with materialism. And what's interesting is DNA operates by the same mechanism of specified complexity, where all of genetic expression and protein synthesis is dependent upon the sequence of DNA, not the composition of DNA strictly, not strictly the structure, but the structure and composition of DNA is analogous to the bonding of ink to paper. You can explain chemically how ink bonds to paper. How do you explain what words mean? That's what DNA is doing. It is taking a sequence of information and interpreting it into biological machines, biological mechanisms. That's what DNA is doing. And that's the basis of all life. So if somebody's asking me, how do you think life got here? I believe in intelligent design. That's my honest perspective. I don't believe in theistic evolution. I don't believe in young earth creationism. I believe in intelligent design. I think intelligent design is compatible with old or young earth creationism. The reason I adhere to an old earth is more cosmological and from physics and from geology, not strictly biology, but also then, biology and the fossil record. The fossil record gives evidence that the universe is old, that the earth is old. Why do I keep running in circles? I need food. What can I trade to get food? Do I have sticks? Cool. I hold intelligent design. That's the inference to the best explanation. And if you say, I don't want to believe in intelligence, I don't want to believe that DNA is information, I want to wait for a materialist explanation, go ahead. But then what you're saying is that my model is the current inference to the best explanation. If you're appealing to the unknown and appealing to, we haven't discovered it yet, but we will prove materialism. We haven't proved it yet, but we will prove it. How is your model superior to mine? If your model is a better inference to the best explanation, I'll adopt your model. I will. How did life get here? I can only understand that from the point of view of intelligent design. because information requires intelligence. That's what I observe in my uniform and repeated experience. Why do I believe that intelligent source is God as opposed to a natural intelligent source? That's a good question. Why do I believe the intelligent source is God as opposed to a higher life form that is still tangible, physical? Or why do I believe that intelligence is God rather than an intelligence that is an intelligence of natural law? Those are questions that I infer from a conjunction of evidence. Right? If you're asking me, why do I believe in God? I'm not saying I believe in God purely because of biology. I'm saying that biology supports my hypothesis of God. Biology supports my God hypothesis. And I also find support in the God hypothesis through logical arguments, such as the cosmological argument, modal ontological argument, fine-tuning argument. Watch my other videos on those topics. I'm just running around in circles because I'm about to end the video. I don't want to start a new task because I'm trying to wrap up. So I might as well chop down trees so that I'm doing something entertaining for you to watch. I'm not saying I look at the universe and by looking at the universe alone, I'm a Christian. Christianity doesn't teach that. Christianity teaches when you look at the universe, it reveals the invisible attributes of God, and all are without excuse. It's saying that creation cries out a creator. That's why children innately look at the diversity of life and see, oh, something smart made that. That's beautiful. Something smart made something beautiful made something beautiful. Something smart engineered something that looks engineered. Children are smarter than a lot of our scholars in that department. Christianity, the reason I'm a Christian is not because of science. I am a Christian because I have known and experienced Jesus. I've known and experienced Jesus. That's why I'm a Christian. I'm not saying I'm a Christian because of biology. The word Christian means little Christ. I am a Christian because I believe in Jesus. I believe Jesus rose from the dead. I believe that the inference to the best explanation of all of the historical facts surrounding the figure of Jesus is that he rose from the dead. And if you disagree with that, we can talk about that. The reason I believe in the God of the Bible is because in my uniform and repeated experience, I have only found the Bible to be true. The more I study the Bible, the more I find the Bible to be true. And if I were to find a contradiction in the Bible, or if somebody were to point out a contradiction in the Bible, then I would doubt that the Bible is the inspired word of God. If somebody were to point out, hey, Image Bear, here's the flaw in your logic of intelligent design, here's the flaw in your science, then I would reject intelligent design. I want to believe what's true. I've made so many points in this video. Let's summarize it. I'm going to put a timestamp here, most likely, to say, skip to this point in the video if you want some conclusions. Also, for the record, not a standalone video. Again, I didn't prepare for this. This is unscripted. I didn't prepare for this. I didn't take notes. It's just my view and my perspective. Then I'm open to scrutiny. Of course, I'm open to scrutiny. I'm putting it on the internet. And I'm a First Amendment absolutist. So if you disagree, please share your disagreements. But that being said, I'm done making caveats. As somebody who studies biology, as somebody who would love to become an expert on these topics, I am skeptical of the neo-Darwinian model. I am skeptical of the model that life came about abiotically. I'm skeptical of the view that life came about chemically. I'm skeptical of the view that all organisms on Earth come from a universal common ancestor. I am skeptical that the mechanism of I am skeptical that the mechanism for natural selection that produces advantageous traits is genetic mutation over time. I'm skeptical of those things. Very briefly, why am I skeptical of those things? Firstly, I am skeptical of chemical evolution. Let's just cut down more trees. I'm skeptical of chemical evolution because in our uniform and repeated experience, we have never observed naturally that any living system can come about without prior existing living systems. That's quite literally the fundamental postulate of the cellular theory. The most fundamental law of biology is that cells only come about by cell division. Because in our uniform and repeated experience, we have only observed that to be the case. And even in a lab, we have never once bottom up from macromolecules, from chemicals, created life. We've reverse engineered life. We've used AI and nanotechnology to animate life. We have taken cell membranes and reverse engineered them and created cells. Yeah, I'm not denying that stuff. But the idea that abiotically in a lab, we have created life bottom up from chemicals, that's never been done. Just because it's never been done, it doesn't mean it's impossible. I'm just saying it's never been done, and you're appealing to an unknown to say, well, just because it hasn't happened doesn't mean it can't. You sound as much religious as I am if you say that. And if we are able to create life from scratch in a lab, all that demonstrates is that an intelligent external agent is required to make life. If we're able to, as intelligent agents, create life from chemicals, that further proves and supports the hypothesis of intelligent design. I'm not convinced of abiogenesis. If you're convinced of abiogenesis, give me your reasons. I'm not convinced of the model that genetic mutations over time produce information because we've only demonstrated the opposite and observed the opposite. Look at breeding dogs. The more you select for traits, when you participate in artificial selection, you have a degradation of information. The rate of mutation as the rate of mutation increases, we observe the rate of gene degradation increases, not the rate of conferring survivable traits. The reason I reject universal common ancestry is I think that the fossil record creates conflict with that. Darwin himself admitted that. And today we've only had further evidence that the fossil record shows sudden bursts of life as opposed to a gradual universal descent of life. And we can't call into question the ability of geological preservation of fossils because we've had soft body tissues preserved. I think that's a starting point. If you guys are interested in this video, if you're interested in this topic, I'd love to do a follow-up. I'd love to do a part 2. I love talking about this stuff. And once again, I'm very open-minded. I want to be scientific. I want to pursue truth. Whatever is true, I want to pursue. If atheism is true, I want to be an atheist. If evolution is true, I want to believe in Darwinian evolution. I believe evolution is true with regards to descent with modification and change over time. But modern evolution is a circular definition of everything that is designed has the appearance of design out of randomness based on genetic mutation over time. Anything that has the display of design has the appearance of design. It's not designed. Everything that exists began to exist by natural processes. That is an assumption, not a fact. There's a lot of assumptions in science. We have lots of assumptions. But please understand that naturalism is a presupposition. Naturalism is a presupposition. It is not something you'd arrive at purely by scientific deduction. And I'm exhausted. And there's probably lots of points I didn't fully make. There's probably things that I messed up on. There's probably some things I wasn't super clear on. But that's okay, because I can make as many videos as I want. If you watched this video, I'm glad you watched it. I'm glad you enjoyed it. If you disagree with me, let's cordially discuss it. Join the Discord. If you enjoyed this video, if you agreed, if you disagreed, whatever you think, consider subscribing. If you made it to this point in the video, you watched this long video, you might as well subscribe. It's totally free. It costs you nothing. It just helps me out. And you can always change your mind later. I hope you guys have a blessed day. I hope this video turned out well. I can always make a part 2 if anyone has unanswered questions. But I hope you have a blessed day. Signing out for now, boys. Ciao.